Tonight, Ottawa says it's ready to crack down on a growing online scam, often targeting young boys with deadly consequences.
He's just a boy. And that's an adult problem. That's why they pick on the kids.
A CBC Marketplace investigation into the dark world of sextortion and those allegedly behind it.
It's very hard to find a job, so I just need something doing to survive.
A deadly rampage at a UK synagogue.
Someone in the crowd shouted, "He's got something on him." And as I turned round, he was literally stabbing.
The fear with anti-Semitic attacks on the rise. Plus, Canada's National Dental Care Program isn't all smiles.
I was approved, but then it turned out to be much more expensive to use it than to not use it.
Why millions of eligible patients aren't getting in the chair.
From CBC News, this is The National with Christine Barak.
Thanks for joining us. Adrian is on assignment. Canada's Justice Minister says laws are about to change as the government aims to crack down on child luring, sextortion, and deep fakes. They are growing threats, and the consequences are too often deadly. More boys, in particular, are being targeted by a fast-growing scam. For some, the shame becomes unbearable. Tonight, a CBC Marketplace investigation brings us the stories of families left devastated. The team also speaks with an alleged scammer. This story is disturbing, and it talks about suicide. As Asha Tomlinson explains, tonight it is eliciting a direct response from the government.
Happy birthday, dear Harry.
Carl Burke and Barbie Lavers look back on happier times. Their 17-year-old son, Harry, died by suicide 2 years ago after he was sextorted.
Harry had come to me sometime in the afternoon to say he was talking to this girl around his age from Nova Scotia. And he showed me her picture, and it all seemed very real.
It wasn't. Harry was corresponding with a scammer who lured him into sending a nude photo. That's when he confided in his dad.
He said, well, I shared pictures. And he said, they're looking for money. And I said, we can't send the money, Harry. I knew what extortion meant. Yeah. I said, they'll just keep asking for more.
The hounding didn't stop. His photo sent to his friends.
He was sitting in the garage, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm just writing some thoughts. He was writing his note.
Spin around.
Ryan Cleland lost his 12-year-old son, Carson, to sextortion in October 2023.
I had spoken with Carson about sextortion online and what to do if it happens. He just couldn't think past his fear.
Carson started chatting with who he thought was a girl online, but it was a scammer who blackmailed him after he sent a nude picture. Then he took his own life.
He's just a boy. And that's an adult problem. That's why they pick on the kids.
Sextortion is on the rise, with Canada's child exploitation tip line CyberTip telling us it receives 50 to 80 reports a week. While girls are targeted too, 85% of victims are boys.
In Canada, that includes Harry Burke and Carson Cleland, Danielle Lintz from Manitoba, William Doiron from New Brunswick, and a 14-year-old boy from Surrey, BC.
We know a lot of the financial sextortion scams right now are coming from West Africa, specifically Nigeria.
Run by a network called the Yahoo Boys. We find a member in Lagos willing to talk. We're not revealing who he is because he fears for his safety.
It's very hard to find a job, so I just need something doing to survive.
Families of the victims want the government to step up. Justice Minister Sean Fraser tells us new laws are on the way.
What people should expect to see in short order is new criminal legislation that's going to address online sexploitation and extortion of kids, in addition to new tools that we want to give to law enforcement to prevent this crime.
The legislation is expected to be tabled this fall, but that change can't come soon enough for the families facing the brutal reality of sextortion. Christine?
Just stunning. And Asha, your team also created fake profiles to test how easy it is for scammers to find kids online?
That's right. We set them up to look like teen boys, and within a span of 24 hours, 7 separate accounts asked for nude photos. That shocked even our cybercrime analysts. We'll have that and much more in our full investigation tomorrow night on CBC television and on YouTube at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in Newfoundland. Christine?
All right. Thank you, Asha. And we want to remind everyone there is help for anyone dealing with sextortion or having thoughts of suicide. You can find CyberTip online or call or text the Suicide Crisis Helpline at 988 from anywhere in Canada, 24 hours a day. Police in the UK have identified the suspect in a deadly ramming and stabbing attack at a synagogue in Manchester. It happened as worshippers were marking Yom Kippur. Briar Stewart takes us through what happened and the new arrests announced tonight.
The moments after the holiest day of the year for the Jewish community was violently shattered. This video was taken after a vehicle rammed into pedestrians. And an attacker got out brandishing a knife. Those looking on were horrified.
Someone in the crowd shouted, "He's got something on him." And as I turned round, he was literally stabbing at the synagogue window.
Police say at the time they believe the attacker could be wearing a bomb. He was shot dead and later identified as a British citizen of Syrian descent.
Counter-terrorism policing has declared this as a terrorist incident.
2 people were killed and 4 others were taken to hospital. It's believed one of those stabbed was a security guard.
I lived here for like 7 years. I've seen nothing but kindness and love from the Jewish community here.
Security has been stepped up at synagogues and Jewish schools, and in some areas there is a visible police presence. This attack comes as the Jewish community was already dealing with a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents. The disturbing trend began nearly 2 years ago in the wake of the Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7th and Israel's ensuing war in Gaza.
There was a feeling of inevitability about it.
Alex Hearn says synagogues already have heightened security. He was part of a volunteer patrol at another one on Wednesday.
We can have all the security guards in the world, and that can't protect us from this climate of hate that's growing.
The UK's Prime Minister called an emergency meeting and is trying to reassure the Jewish community.
I will do everything in my power to guarantee you the security that you deserve.
The police are continuing their investigation. They searched houses near the synagogue and said they've arrested 3 individuals on suspicion of helping to prepare and instigate a terrorist attack. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
As Hamas considers the 20-point peace plan put forward by the U.S. earlier this week, Palestinians continue to flee the Israeli offensive in Gaza City. I don't want food, drinks, or anything, says this man leaving the city, adding, what matters to me is that we get out safely. Hundreds of thousands are believed to remain. Many of them can't afford to move or are too weak. Israel's defense minister said yesterday it was their last chance to leave Gaza City, and those who stay would be considered terrorist supporters. With the world's eyes on Gaza, there's relatively little attention on the plight of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Paul Hunter is in the Middle East tonight. He visited the Jordan Valley, where people say being forgotten is exactly what they're worried about.
On a hillside along the Jordan Valley in the occupied West Bank, Ibrahim Salameh surveys the rubble which, until 2 weeks ago, was his house. He lived here until the day Israeli forces pulled up with heavy equipment and flattened it, saying he had no permit. My life is over, he told us. I'm unable to feed my children. I was unable to protect my home. There's nothing I can do. Salameh, a farm worker, is far from alone in his worries. The broad fear in this region, as the world's attention is focused on the Gaza Strip, is that Israel is slowly, surely moving toward taking much of this, toward annexing the fertile lands farmed by Palestinians for so long. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged as much back in 2019 with a campaign promise to take the Jordan Valley, a notion Israeli politicians had talked about for decades. Though facing international condemnation for that, Netanyahu has not followed through. But meanwhile, Israeli forces regularly demolish Palestinian structures here, often, it says, to enforce building regulations. Azim Haj Mohammed, mayor of the village of Farouche Bayet Dajan, with his own pile of rubble, what was meant to be a civic building, knocked down earlier this year, he says, by Israeli forces, again citing permit issues. We say that we're on our land, he says. We're in our homes. We will keep this land and we will not leave it. Echoed at this fruit farm a few kilometers away, where owner Mohammed Sadeh, who supplies dates for clients in Canada and worldwide, told us Israeli forces raided the place this week, leaving it intact, but his workers rattled. We want to live in peace, he says. We don't want to start a war. We want our children to live, to have rights like anyone else around the world. All of it's left Palestinians here with a simple message to Israel.
What do you say to Benjamin Netanyahu?
What have we done, he says. Why is this happening? And with that, Christine, Ibrahim shrugged and turned away.
And Paul, now we have Donald Trump's latest peace plan. How does that figure into West Bank fears of annexation?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, in the past, including recently at the United Nations, Trump has said that he wouldn't allow Israel to annex the West Bank. But he didn't say that at the White House this week in announcing the plan with Benjamin Netanyahu, saying only that under the deal, Israel would not annex Gaza. Hence, so many Palestinians in the West Bank who still fear the threat of annexation there continues. Christine.
Thanks, Paul. Paul Hunter in Jerusalem tonight. Turning to news here at home, Alberta is reporting its first death from measles since an outbreak of the disease began in the province in March. A baby born prematurely after its mother contracted measles died shortly after birth. While cases in the province have dropped since peaking in July, there have been almost 2,000 confirmed cases of measles this year. For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Lenora Saxinger. She's an infectious diseases specialist at the University of Alberta, and she joins us now from Edmonton. Dr. Saxinger, what was your reaction to hearing of a premature baby dying of measles in Alberta?
Well, I mean, there's just the human tragedy of it. And as an infectious diseases specialist, I mean, the scale of the outbreak that's been going on in, Ontario and Alberta over the last months is just inconceivable. And in a way, you would expect that we would start to see some severe outcomes at some point, but that doesn't mean that it's okay, because this is, in fact, a preventable death.
A premature baby also died in Ontario. In your view, has the Alberta government done enough to stop the spread of measles?
Well, I mean, I guess I'd argue that any preventable death in a situation where there's a lot of places across Canada that have suboptimal vaccination rates is a big red flag for, all of the governments, that we need to do something differently. I know that the public health people on the ground have been putting in a lot of time trying to contain this outbreak, but measles is a real beast to try to control. And there's a lot of challenges. And so there's, the outbreak control part of it. And then there's also the longer term investment that's needed for public health and for vaccine access, and very, very importantly for public trust. And I think that's an area where we need to see a lot of movement over the next years, because obviously we're kind of heading backwards in terms of vaccine preventable diseases. And there's a really big risk that this could actually happen in other places and with other diseases.
Dr. Saxinger, what is your advice to pregnant women or women who are planning a pregnancy?
And I mean, that distinction is huge, because MMR vaccine or any measles vaccine isn't recommended during pregnancy because it's an incredibly effective vaccine, but it's a live virus vaccine. And so it really is advised that if you could conceive, you should make sure that you've had 2 doses of vaccine. And if you're in a position of being pregnant and being underprotected, the real thing is to look out for risk. And if you are in contact, that be identified as soon as possible, because women can be given prophylaxis with intravenous immune globulin to offer some protection for themselves and for their baby if they get measles exposed during pregnancy. And so that takes a few things. That means that you have to know that you've been exposed and that you have to seek care early. And then a lot of effort will be made to make sure that those women are protected as much as possible.
All right, Dr. Lenora Saxinger, thank you.
Thank you.
For the second time this week, an inspection kiosk outage at some Canadian airports caused delays for travelers. Canada Border Services Agency says the outage lasted about 4 hours. Sunday saw hours-long delays in airports after the same issue. The agency says both outages were linked to a technical problem during routine system maintenance. A new federal agency is looking to speed things up when it comes to military procurement. The Prime Minister says it will get Canadian soldiers the equipment they need when they need it. Murray Brewster shows us why that's a real struggle with no easy fix.
It is a fantastic day.
Stephen Fuhr is excited as he announces the government's new Defence Investment Agency. Holding on to that enthusiasm may be tough. He's trying to reform a system often described as ponderous, even glacial. Over 20 years to get new maritime helicopters, nearly a decade for new search planes, more than 15 years of trying to design and build new warships. And that is not to mention the ongoing saga over the US-made F-35 and whether Canada will buy a full order or shop elsewhere.
The goal or aim of this agency is to equip the Canadian Armed Forces with the tools and equipment they need at the speed of relevance, bringing Canadian industry into the tent to stimulate our own economy.
The agency is being given private sector sensibility, recruiting former banker Doug Guzman as CEO. Right now, Canada buys almost all of its military gear in the U.S., but last summer signed a defense partnership with Europe, hoping to open procurement doors and Canadian business opportunities there. Some analysts worry about swapping one dependency for another.
I don't think there's a really deep understanding that reducing dependencies on other countries for our defense industrial base is really, really important.
With certain packages. Simply getting Canadian companies more involved in defense procurement may not be enough. A former defense official says the federal government will have to make hard, specific choices about the industries needed to protect our sovereignty.
We need to look across the range of defense capabilities and decide what do we need to produce at home.
The last time Canada did defense production on a massive scale was during the Korean War. Lately, it's experimented with the National Shipbuilding Strategy, constructing Arctic patrol ships and now destroyers at home. But they have been plagued with cost overruns and delays. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Police in Ontario say they've dismantled a major drug trafficking and car theft network.
30 people arrested, 213 charges laid, significant quantities of drugs, guns, and cash seized.
The investigation, dubbed Project Road King, began in August of last year, involving police forces from Toronto, Hamilton, and Niagara, as well as the RCMP and Border Services. Investigators also seized 38 stolen vehicles bound for international markets. Millions of Canadians are now signed up for the federal dental plan.
Many of my patients never seen a dentist before. There's so much work to be done.
But what's keeping about half of them out of the chair? A damning report on the alleged inner workings of a Saskatchewan university.
You've got them meddling again and potentially protecting the president.
CBC News looks into the allegations against the school's president next. And he may be injured, but Brown Bear Chunk still came out on top.
He ended up the season fatter than ever.
Meet the newly crowned winner of Fat Bear Week. We're back in 2.
Stay calm, stay seated with your seatbelt securely fastened.
Some frightening moments Wednesday night at New York's LaGuardia Airport. 2 Delta jets collided while taxiing, the wing of one plane plowing into the cockpit of the other. A flight attendant sustained minor injuries. None of the 85 passengers aboard the 2 planes were injured. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board is now investigating. Millions of Canadians are now covered under the federal dental plan, but many who've enrolled still haven't been to the dentist. As Marina von Stackelberg shows us, most clinics are charging more than the plan pays, and patients are left holding the bill.
It's a milestone for public health care.
More than 5 million Canadians are currently covered under the Canadian Dental Care Plan.
But nearly half of those patients haven't yet been to the dentist. Clinics are busy. There are backlogs in some regions, especially since the program's significant expansion this spring to cover 18 to 64-year-olds.
Many of my patients never seen a dentist before. There's so much work to be done. There's extraction, there's filling.
This dentist is only charging what the federal government will reimburse. That means some of his patients aren't paying a cent. But that's not what most dentists are doing. This plan lets them charge more than what Ottawa will cover. It's called balance billing, and patients are on the hook to pay the difference. That cost can vary greatly, and some patients say their dental clinics are charging extra to process paperwork.
I was approved, but then it turned out to be much more expensive to use it than to not use it.
I don't believe that these are the kind of people that can have, oh, you know, I have an extra $50 laying around my house in order to cover the paperwork for a government program that's supposed to be assisting me. It just, I don't know, that just doesn't seem right to me at all.
But dentists say balance billing is common in private plans, and it's why nearly all clinics are now participating in this public program. There's also another reason why some patients aren't rushing into the dental chair.
But a lot of people really don't like going, and they'll avoid it at all costs until something causes them to want to go to see the dentist. So it's not unusual that people have coverage but don't use it.
The program covers an average of $800 of dental work per person each year. So far, that's cost taxpayers more than $3 billion. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Allegations of nepotism and mismanagement at a Saskatchewan university. A CBC News investigation uncovers new details. After the break, Rosie is here with that issue.
Hey, Christine, tonight we're going to talk about Alberta's pitch for a West Coast pipeline.
This is a Canada project, and this is a test of whether Canada works as a country.
What's to be made of Alberta's proposal and the pushback from British Columbia? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and a whole lot more.
CBC News has obtained a scathing internal report about the conduct of the president of First Nations University in Saskatchewan. She's accused of hiring family and friends, disregarding university policies, and as Jeff Leo tells us, even firing the whistleblower who raised concerns.
Jacqueline Ottman became president of First Nations University back in late 2021. It did not take long for concerns to emerge. In 2023, the board launched an investigation of dozens of allegations. The scathing report that emerged found Ottman was involved in 9 cases of nepotism, hiring friends and family into her circle of favor. And it found she violated many university financial and governance policies. The report concluded she was empire building. After the investigation was launched, Ottman fired the key whistleblower, Jason Wong, who was the university's VP of Finance and Administration. Investigators found that firing was at least in part retaliatory. Alan Adam was the vice chair of the board that commissioned the investigation.
The president is not the right person for the job.
He says the board chair at the time agreed Ottman should be fired, but a group of new board members, mostly First Nations chiefs, had a different view.
They said we're behind our president 100%.
Adam said he and the board chair were pushed out. He worries that history is repeating itself. 15 years ago, this university was in turmoil while being led by a board largely composed of political appointees. Ottawa and the provincial government cut the university's funding.
I guess really what we're talking about is the loss of confidence by this government in this institution.
The university's funding was cut and then restored after new rules were established, banning politicians from the board. But recently, the chief-led organization that runs the university decided to once again give politicians the majority.
How many chances are we going to get? We keep repeating and keep making the same mistakes over and over.
Ottman has not replied to CBC's request for an interview. In an email, the board chair says the organization has done a comprehensive review of the reports and it has complete confidence in the president. Jeff Leo, CBC News, Regina.
Now let's break down the news shaping our world. Rosie is here with that issue.
At issue tonight, Alberta pushes forward on a pitch for a West Coast pipeline and begins work on a proposal to the Major Projects Office.
What stands before us right now is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to unlock our wealth of resources and become a world-leading energy superpower.
The move has already met resistance from BC.
There is no project. There is no bridge to cross unless the Albertan government and the federal Canadian government are committing billions of taxpayer dollars to build this project.
While Smith says this project is for the country.
This is a Canada project, and this is a test of whether Canada works as a country.
So what's been made of the provincial push and push back over a West Coast pipeline? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Obviously not the first time that Alberta has said it wants a pipeline, but this was a fascinating move by the Premier from a political perspective and from a policy perspective. Chantal, what do you think she's trying to do here?
Well, you're right that it was a political move because as far as a project, we're very far from a project. $14 million basically is an ad campaign for a couple of months. What I think is happening here is Premier Smith is forcing Prime Minister Carney to fish shortcut bait, i.e. she's using this announcement of a project that is not a project and that won't be a project for even next spring to force him to decide, is he keeping the tanker ban? Is he keeping the legislation that is left from Justin Trudeau's legacy on climate? Or is he not? And he has never said one way or the other. But the tanker ban is something that is, as you saw this week, very important, in particular to BC, and not just New Democrats, but also Indigenous nations in BC. And it is also a signal that other Canadians who voted for Mark Carney on the basis of his climate credentials are watching. So at some point, sitting on that fence and flirting with both sides is going to become more difficult.
Though in some ways, Andrew, that's what C5 was about, being able to sort of sit on the fence and carve out the pieces of legislation that you wanted to carve out or exempt in order to get things done. But what do you make of Chantal's assessment there?
Well, it's one thing to be making exceptions to your own regulations. It's another thing to be overcoming a bunch of other people's opposition, but that's not even the half of what she's asking here. Asking, by the way, with this asterisk attached to it, that if this doesn't work, then Canada doesn't work, which is a bit on the nose. But it's one thing to say, and she's right to, and it obviously goes to the territory to say, you can't just be for pipelines in principle. You've got to be willing to put some political capital behind it. So that's something to ask of him. And then in this case, you're asking him to overcome the opposition of both the Premier of British Columbia and Indigenous groups. Okay, maybe that's something that can be done. But to ask at the top of this that you've also got to scrap a signature piece of legislation that is extremely popular in British Columbia, where, by the way, you have 20 seats versus the 2 seats you have in Alberta, it's a tall order. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's going to have to. There's going to be a real question here: is can an equivalent amount of safety be achieved without a tanker ban? Can there be regulations that can mitigate the risk to an acceptable level? I'm not at all sure that's the case. He's certainly been put in a very, very tight spot.
Assuming that a proponent comes along, because the Premier has said she doesn't want to pay for a pipeline either. This is the beginning of a conversation and a process, and to everyone's point here, Althea, a political move, which is what you wrote about today, too.
Yeah, I feel like Chantal just summed up my column. But
sorry.
I think there's two things to note.
Yes, just to be clear.
We're of the same mind. Two things to note. First of all, Mark Carney does not need to make a decision on the tanker ban because he can use C5 to carve out an exemption to that, and we will, if it finds itself on the project list, that is something that we can find out months, if not years, down the line. I think what is interesting, it's not just that she is forcing him to pick a side. Is he, on the side of the climate MPs and his BC and Quebec caucus, and not just them, and there's lots of people in Ontario, for example, who are also think that another bitumen pipeline is a terrible idea, especially on the North Coast. Like she talked about the Northern Gateway. This is all the people who were upset about the Spirit Bear and the Haida Gwaii and the very delicate ecosystem up there. It's not just the caucus in Quebec and British Columbia, but that's where the chunk of the Liberal seats and support is. So is he willing to sacrifice those seats potentially to curry favor with her on a pipeline project that is completely half-baked? Or is he going to say no, at least no right now, and kick the can down the road and wait to see what she can actually come up with? I think that's more likely the scenario. Yeah. But then she boxed herself in by saying that if it's not on the list come November before the Grey Cup, then this is a proof point that Canada doesn't work, and she's fueling the separatist movement in her own province. So in a way, they all have kind of boxed themselves in a certain way. David Eby has not said no, but I will note that he also faces a leadership review in November, and for him, maybe this is a gift from the gods because he gets to become Mr. Climate, Mr. Protection of British Columbia. Maybe this is a good thing for him.
Chantal, yeah.
Okay, but can we agree that you cannot carve out temporarily a tanker ban and build a pipeline to Tidewater?
Technically you could, but I don't know how you would.
Well, I mean, they're going to get sued on this bill, but the legislation seems like it would give them the ability to do that.
Okay.
Yes, but you cannot do it temporarily. Yeah. You either have a tanker ban or you don't, because you're not going to have a project that may fall under a tanker ban later down the road. But can we also revisit recent history called Northern Gateway and forget about the romantic notion that a few tree huggers in BC were against it? So suppose that this project gets adopted by the federal government, who then pushes it, and there is a private promoter. You are literally where Stephen Harper was with Alison Redford and the Conservative government of Alberta, facing off, not the NDP in BC, but facing off against Christy Clark, who was then Premier, and who said BC is rejecting this pipeline. So where do we get this impression that you can just railroad it back into BC? And yes, the seats matter to the Liberals, but also the Prime Minister's commitment to not force a project on a province.
Andrew?
Not force a province, but I hate that kind of language. We have a federal government to do federal things. One of the primary federal things is to decide matters that transcend provincial boundaries. You're not always going to get everybody on side on whichever decision you make. And I think we really need to, I wish people would dial down the temperature. I know that's an unlikely ask, but it has to be established that it is at least the right of the federal government to make these decisions. It is certainly not the right of the Premier of British Columbia to veto things. He can express all kinds of political opposition he likes, but to be talking in terms as if the Premier of any province had a veto on these kinds of projects is just fundamentally anti-federalism.
Though Premier Smith is doing the opposite, right? Premier Smith is doing the opposite by suggesting, Go ahead, Chantal.
But it was Mark Carney's sentence that he wouldn't force any province. That being said, the federal government is not about to overwrite the environmental legislation of provinces, or if that's the business that it's going to be in, that minority government will be replaced sooner rather than later, because the voters who did go to the Liberals believed that Mark Carney believed in climate policy.
Last word to you on this, Althea. Not last word forever, but for today.
Well, so Mark Carney did repeat that to caucus on Wednesday, that if this, basically that this is kind of a half-baked project, and that if British Columbia does not want it, it's not going to go forward. But I don't know if that's really what he's telling Alberta, because behind, like in the quarters of power here, we keep hearing that they're ready to lift the emissions cap on the oil and gas sector as long as Danielle Smith is really fully committed to the Pathways Plus project, which found its way on the first tranche of projects. And if they raise the industrial carbon price and bring in the methane regulations, it seems like they're kind of doing a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So she's not wrong to kind of force him to stake out a position. I think there's a lot of Liberals who would want to know, actually, where Mark Carney stands. And I'm not sure that they can kick that can, maybe they can kick it down for a few more months, but that's about it.
Okay, as I said, we will, I'm sure, talk about this many times again, but we'll leave it there for tonight. When we come back, we'll take a look at the NDP leadership race.
I'm Rob Ashton. I'm a dock worker, and I'm running to lead the NDP.
So who can rebuild the party after its collapse in the last election? How viable is the future for the NDP? That's next. At issue, NDP leadership. More names enter the race to lead the New Democrats and share their vision for how to reform the party.
We need to make a bigger table, that more people need to see themselves within our party. We need to go where people are.
With some of the candidates coming from the outside.
In this moment of epic change and uncertainty, our party is needed as never before.
So what's been made of the names vying for the NDP leadership? Can they bring the NDP back to party status? Let's bring everyone back. Chantal, Andrew, Althea. Should say Avi Lewis is an NDP-er, but he hasn't been an MP or a member of caucus or anything. So he's tried this before. We only have a handful of contenders. Althea, why don't you start us off? How big a deal is this? What has to happen for the NDP to gather some momentum?
Well, I think if you're a New Democrat, you're probably encouraged that there is actually a few people who want this job. So there's a caucus member, Heather McPherson, the Edmonton MP, who has, come out before in favor of a pipeline and is trying to broaden the tent. She's already butting heads with another one of her caucus members, Leah Gazan, over some of the comments she made about a purity test in the party. So you kind of feel like if the NPD is not careful, they might fall into the same trap as the Green Party and get consumed with identity politics, and then that becomes the main issue. And then you have Avi Lewis, which I think is the person that Heather McPherson was kind of addressing with that purity test, who was the co-author of the LEAP Manifesto, which probably is somewhat responsible for the fact that Thomas Mulcair didn't have a job after, who basically called for keeping the oil in the ground. So there are clear differentiations between the candidates. And then you have Rob Ashton, who's a union leader from British Columbia. I interviewed him this week for our podcast, It's Political, and he is really not a politician, and not like Mark Carney says he wasn't a politician. He listens to your question and then takes the moment to think about it, and basically told me that he's not going to have positions. He's going to assemble his caucus and they're going to debate the issues and then they're going to have a vote, and he will go out and defend that in a united front, even if he personally disagrees with it. Yeah. Which is unusual, especially in the kind of political environment in which we live, where it's very leader-centric, and you kind of wonder, maybe you can do that with 7 MPs, but can you do that with 120?
Yeah, I mean, if you can get back there, because that's what's at stake, Andrew, right? It's choosing a leader who can carve out some space somewhere on the political spectrum to attract people back to the party.
Yeah, they're getting a little bit of an assist from Mark Carney, who is having to define himself under the pressure we described in the first segment. Yeah. And in so doing, certainly some progressives, I'm sure, will have decided he's not what they're looking for, and they're going to be taking another look at the NDP. So it's a moment of opportunity for them. It's maybe a positive way of spinning it. But other parties and the NDP itself have been counted out before, and their brand proved to be enduring. But they do have, really large definitional questions. Are they going to be the party of the traditional working class and try to reconnect with union voters, some of whom have been straying towards the Conservatives, or are they going to be the party of downtown progressives with the constellation of issues far beyond wages and standard of living for working people? To see how toxic that can be, just to refer to the thing that Althea mentioned, Heather McPherson made a statement, which is a pretty standard statement for a leadership candidate to make, of I don't think we want to be have too much of an ideological purity test, we need to have a big tent, et cetera. And for this, she was accused of, quote unquote, tacitly endorsing white supremacy. Because if you follow the logic, if you're not having an ideological purity test, you're telling minority equity-seeking groups to take up a seat at the back of the bus, or whatever rhetorical trope you want to attach to that. One has a feeling this could get quite nasty before too long.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how the divisions inside the party, the broader membership, could lead to big problems. The Middle East is another area where it's been percolating along online and other places. So, Chantal, how necessary is this to go well for the party to survive? Because no one's counting them out, but this has to unfold in a certain way, I would think.
This is this is a party that says it wants to be a national party and a contender for government, but it is the only main national party that actually does not insist on having some equal way to all regions of the country. I.e., if I recruit a fan club in one place, Montreal, where I live, I can actually win this, which tells you how more exposed than the Conservatives and the Liberals they are to single issue movements, taking advantage of that campaign to elect the person that they like best. First problem. Second problem, yes, they've disappeared from Toronto, they've disappeared from Quebec. They're not very present in Atlantic Canada. I looked at those three candidates. They all have interesting features. I can't wait to see how any of them would handle a French language leaders debate. Because from what I've heard of their French, they basically have left it at the door when they announced that they were running.
Althea, I'll give you the last 30 seconds in terms of how important it is that this be successful in order for the party to come back.
Well, Chantal is not wrong about the one member, one vote, and that does distort things, and that's one of the reasons that, frankly, Jagmeet Singh was able to win on the first ballot back in 2017. But that's for the NDP members to decide if that's a system that they want to change. What it does mean, though, is if you're Alexandre Boulris, the lone NDP MP in Quebec, and when you think back about the orange wave that propelled the NDP to official opposition back in 2011, it's really hard to see how any of the candidates vying for the leadership at the moment would be able to do that, because to Chantal's point, they don't really speak French. I think Heather McPherson has the best French out of the bunch, and I don't know. Like, you might need simultaneous simultaneous interpretation in order to do the French debate. So it's going to be a challenge. But I do think that this is like, they're not looking at this like we're vying for power next term. They're thinking about this as a progressive rebuild, and they're focused on getting those blue-collar union voters that left them.
Okay, I got to leave it there. We'll talk about that again, I'm sure, too, as the race unfolds. Thank you so much. That is At Issue on The National. We're going to keep on talking and discuss the Liberals' latest office designed to expedite procurement. You can catch that on YouTube or the At Issue podcast. Now back to Christine in Toronto.
Thanks, Rosie. Coming up, celebrating the 11th annual Fat Bear Week.
Fat Bear Week is a celebration of the healthy bears of Katmai National Park.
Who is crowned the fattest of them all? Find out in our moment next. This is Chunk, the champion of Fat Bear Week. It's an annual tournament celebrating the brown bears of Katmai National Park in Alaska. They're bulking up, preparing for winter hibernation. The tournament has been a viral hit for years. Fans all over the world cast ballots for their favorite bear, and one bear comes out on top. Tonight, the crowned victor makes our moment.
The winner this year is 32 Chunk, who has lived up to his name. He really exemplifies how resilient and adaptable these bears are. He left for a couple weeks, came back, and he had a broken jaw. That's a big injury. He adapted, and he ended up season fatter than ever. We show a skinny picture from the beginning of the season compared with a fat picture at the end of the season. We had over 1.7 million votes. He really deserves the title of Fat Bear Week champion. Fat Bear Week is a celebration of the healthy bears of Katmai National Park. We are bringing hope and joy to people around the world, but we also want them to be conscious and aware that unless we work to protect these resources, they might go away.
Amazing. Just so you know, bears can eat a whopping 50,000 calories a day. They think Chunk now weighs over 1,200 pounds, and he did it all with a broken jaw. Maybe that was part of his charm. Voters sided with the underdog, or bear. From all of us here at The National, thank you for being with us. I'm Christine Birak. Take care.